Hello, listeners, and welcome back to the Peggy Smedley Show. As always, I'm your host, Peggy Smedley. Today, we're talking about one of the most debated topics in materials, manufacturing, sustainability, advanced recycling. It's a space that's filled with promise, confusion, policy battles, and big economic projections. And it sits right in the intersection of innovation, regulation, and the future of American manufacturing. As the era weighs whether to classify advanced recycling as manufacturing, the stakes couldn't be higher. This decision could reshape investment, accelerate new technologies, and redefine how the U.S. handles plastic waste. But it also raises tough questions about transparency, scale, and what's truly possible. To help us tackle this topic, I'm joined with Ross Eisenberg, who is the president of the America's Plastic Makers at the American Chemistry Council. Someone who's been at the center of this national conversation on recycling, policy, circularity, and the future of plastics in America. Ross Eisenberg. Ross, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Peggy. Really appreciate being here.
This is a tough conversation we're going to have today, and I think it's a big one. I've been covering, I would say, petroleum, and plastics is literally in everything. And most people don't realize that when you think about these things. But what exactly is advanced recycling, and how does it differ from traditional mechanical recycling? We need to have that conversation.
Absolutely. It is the right place to start. And I'll give you the sort of the scientific answer and kind of the best way to explain it in plain terms. So the scientific answer is advanced recycling refers to a suite of chemical conversion processes, different chemical technologies, and there really are a number of them that essentially take used plastic, take it back down to its raw materials, so the natural gas, the oil, and then essentially can turn it into new products. So that is the chemical definition. The different chemistries are pyrolysis, solvolysis, methanolysis, a whole bunch of olysis, right? Then there's kind of what it really is in plain terms. And I like to say it's unbaking a cake. So if you could take a cake, you take that cake that's finished and you could basically take it all the way back down to the milk and the eggs and the flour and the sugar and the butter, and then turn it into a cake again, and then unbake it and then turn it into a cake again. And it's perfect every time. That's advanced recycling. That is advanced recycling, chemical recycling, whatever you want to call it. That is essentially the technology or technologies that we are talking about and what they can do. They can take used plastic, take it back down to its origins, and basically make it into new plastic or similar products, just like you were using regular oil or gas to do it. So it's a pretty impressive technology.
I love the way you describe that, because when we think about talking about something that's complex and putting it into layman's terms, like baking a cake, people think is easy, but sometimes it's not if you're mixing everything wrong. So I love the way you did that. But what's the biggest benefits of advanced recycling when we think about today and where we want to be? Because most people are just like, it's another thing we've been talking about, but it's really much more complicated than that.
So the biggest benefit, and there are several, but the biggest is that it is a way to handle the types of plastic that are just not recycled today. It is complementary to what we call mechanical recycling, which is the recycling that we've had in place for 30, 40, 50 years. And that, in a nutshell, is fairly straightforward. It is essentially grinding the plastic, washing it, remelting it. That's mechanical recycling for plastic. It works really good on things like milk jugs, Deer Park water bottles, clear plastics, rigid plastics, things like that. You can mechanical recycle that stuff and get new plastic out of it. Everything else, right? All the other plastics that we use during the course of a day, whether it's in the medical space or the Ziploc baggies or the beef jerky pouches or whatever it is we're using, or the car bumpers, everything else really doesn't get done via mechanical recycling. And that's the space that advanced recycling can handle. And so if we are going to get to a point where plastics aren't in the environment, plastics aren't in landfills, there's a certain amount you can get by mechanical recycling, but there's just certain that you can't. And if you're going to get there, if the goal is to get more plastics recycled, which we believe it should be, you have to have advanced recycling. And that is the promise of this technology.
We hear a lot of complaints about plastics. It's been a big concern for a lot of people, a lot of environmentalists. So the EPA is considering classifying advanced recycling as manufacturing. That's the discussion we're having here. What would that change in practical terms for the industry if we really are talking about this, and maybe what we're talking about our landfills in the bigger scope of things?
Yeah, there's two things in the sort of governmental space that seem to be hampering the ability of this industry to compete. And when I say compete, essentially beyond the level of everything else, right? Whether it's regular plastic manufacturing or other types of recycling, the thing that is different for this industry right now is essentially some ambiguity on the policy. And that's not unusual with a new technology. This has really only been commercially available for 15, 17 years. And it really has been past 5 years is when they started making it and putting it in things. So we have some policy ambiguity, and that's never a good place, right? That's the worst place to be, because when you are trying to get a permit to build one of these things, often you don't get it, or it just takes so long that you kind of run out of time, run out of money, the capital stops coming in, things like that. And that's the death knell. And so we're trying to resolve those two things. And they happen on two sides of it. One is, how do you classify this? And this is what EPA is doing right now. How do you classify a new advanced recycling facility for purposes of emissions, right? And how is it controlled under the Clean Air Act? How do you define it? The other side of it, which we're hoping the FTC will get to at some point, is when the content comes out of these things and you put it in of these advanced recycling facilities and you put it into other products, does it count? And we can get to that in a minute. But starting with the EPA piece, the piece that's burning hot right now. So EPA, for about 7 years, has been going back and forth on how to define what an advanced recycling facility is for purposes of how to regulate its emissions. And the goal of this is, so if you're building a new facility, it's going to have industrial technology in it. You want to make sure that the surrounding communities are safe and that any emissions are controlled and that the best technology is in place. There are two ways that EPA has teed this up over the years. One, which we believe is the right answer, is to regulate it as manufacturing, chemical manufacturing, whatever kind of manufacturing. The other, which a number of sort of environmental groups have pushed for over the years, is to regulate it as solid waste incineration. And from a practical standpoint, regulations aren't that different in terms of what they would impose, right? You're still putting controls in, you're still controlling the emissions, you're still not spewing stuff, right? It's all the protections that the Clean Air Act provides, which is good. It's a good law. The difference between the two is if you classify it as solid waste incineration, which obviously it is not, because we're not actually incinerating anything. We're trying to make new products out of it. But let's assume that you did. You can't sell it, right? You now don't have a product to sell because it's no longer recycled content. You've now incinerated waste. So it essentially destroys the market. And so we obviously think that's a bad idea. EPA has proposed to regulate it as manufacturing, which means when you get a permit, you get a permit just like any other manufacturing facility would get that permit. It would impose, in many ways, the strictest possible controls under the law for emissions. We're just asking them to do it to get some certainty across states, because right now there just isn't. About half the states in the country regulate as manufacturing. The other half just don't have an answer. And what's happening is all of the new recycling facilities, advanced recycling facilities, are going to the states where they've defined it as manufacturing because they know that there's a pathway forward. Having EPA deal with this once and for all and just settle it, we think would take away a barrier to building some of these facilities.
You talk about incineration versus manufacturing. It sounds much better when you say it's manufacturing versus incineration, at least in all of those communities as well. It just makes more sense in that, because I would imagine there's a lot of misconception on what the communities think that they have. That has to be.
There's a lot of it. And that is the crux of this, right? Anytime you're going to build anything new, the surrounding community is concerned, right? Whether it's a Walmart or a hospital.
Talk about today's data centers. Look at data centers.
The data centers, right? It's new things are, and when they're big and industrial, the community's concerned. But that is why we have laws that sort of control this and can reassure it. And yet, I think there is some scare tactics there by saying it's solid waste incineration, right? You're burning plastic, burning trash, all this kind of stuff. Look, scientifically, that is not what happens here, right? So the main technology is something called pyrolysis, and that's what EPA is really dealing with in this regulation. And pyrolysis essentially heats the used plastic, to a level that doesn't essentially burn it, right? And it essentially heats it up to a point where it separates into its raw materials and chamber without any oxygen. So because there's no oxygen in there, you can't burn anything. You need free oxygen to actually set something on fire and incinerate it. And so because there's no oxygen in the chamber, scientifically, it is not incineration. So we think we're actually on pretty solid ground there to begin with. That being said, at the end of the day, like I said at the beginning of this a few minutes ago, we're making new products, right? If you wanted to incinerate it, you're trying to destroy it and have nothing at the end except maybe some ash. But the goal of advanced recycling is to recycle the product, right? Is to actually take the raw materials, turn it into new materials. And so incinerating it would be the opposite of what they're trying to do here. But yeah, that has been an issue here, is the optics of this and trying to reassure them. I've been to a number of these facilities. The one that I like to, so there's one in Atlanta down in Fulton County, and it's, when you listen to folks who've never been there or trying to scare the community, they're saying it's a dark, dirty, dangerous manufacturing kind of thing. I showed up, it's literally next to a Six Flags and a Great American Cookie Company. It's like a warehouse that has a guy with a rake on the inside who's literally pushing the used plastics into a conveyor belt, which then go through the regular mechanical recycling facility. They're ground up, they're melted, and then they're pushed into the pyrolysis unit on the back, which is a relatively small unit. They're separated, and then they're essentially, the end product is the sort of the, what they call pyrolysis oil, which is the substitute for oil and gas that can go into the new products. Very small, the emissions profile of that place is like a school or a hospital. We're not talking about lead smelting or anything like that. And I think because there's not a lot of these and because people haven't seen a lot of them, the scare tactics work. And so we're often chasing ghosts on this one.
So let's think about that. You have the ability, now you have to get FTC and EPA on the same page on different things here, but you have the other optics of all of these plastics end up, as I started the conversation with, in landfills. Here you can turn and do something better. The other side of this is now your supporters say this could create more than 173,000 jobs. You're also turning something that just pollutes the environment into something more positive, and it can turn $13 billion, if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, to the payroll. Where would those jobs come from? You just described raking. I mean, There's doesn't have to be this higher education. Maybe it does. Correct me if I'm wrong. It just seems like there's a lot of opportunity we're talking about that could turn communities around that have been dilapidated, or it just seems like a lot more opportunities that maybe need to be discussed here.
That's right. So we performed that economic analysis, and it was basically to answer, if we took 50% of the plastics that otherwise would just go to a landfill, and you recycled them with any kind of recycling, mechanical recycling or advanced recycling, what would happen? And the numbers that you just rolled off are what we forecast here, which is a big number. And that is 173,000 jobs is roughly the size of the milk industry, right? Creating another big industry in the United States around recycling would be pretty impressive. And to your question, yeah, it's along the value chain, right? Because that assumes not just the engineers and the sort of the folks in these new technical facilities that are running the machines and are doing the data entry and all that kind of stuff, but it's also waste hauling, right? It's transportation. It is the folks at the facility that are sorting out the new plastics and getting more stuff into the system. Oddly enough, one of the most common complaints that all plastic recyclers have is they can't get enough clean plastic into the system, which is crazy, right? Given that we have all this extra plastic, the fact that they can't get their hands on a reliable stream to recycle is almost mind-bending. But at the same time, that is the truth. And it is just the reality of our current recycling infrastructure. It was built in the 70s. It's mixed things. You know as well as I do, you put stuff in the bin, you don't know what's going to happen to it. You know, my municipality stopped taking glass. The one down the street stopped taking different types of plastics. It's provincial. It's difficult. It's old. And what we're assuming is that, yeah, if you can actually start scaling up the back-end recycling of some of these plastics through any means, you can also start building out that supply chain as well. And that is jobs across the board. That's everything from union jobs to the white-collar jobs, just sort of everything. And there's a lot of potential here, in addition to the obvious environmental potential.
No, I agree with you. We've seen they don't take bottles here, and the plastic, we know it's not sorted right. People have no idea how to really recycle. It's become really, we wonder how well the recycling is actually working. And we talk about it. We want it to be, this is just a great opportunity to look at it. So has regulatory, I guess we'll step back. We want to see the jobs you're talking about. We want to see the community growth. But how has regulatory uncertainty, let's go back to that, because I always feel that's a big stumbling block, and we really have to address that. At the state level now, not only the federal level, because that's what you challenge, you also have state level problems. And so we're talking about this as we're talking communities are stopping to collect all of these recycling. And how has the state level held things back from what you want to do with advanced recycling in the US? Where are we with that?
So it is as challenging, I think is a good way to put it.
So you're battling everything. You're not just battling
everything,
love. You're like, you've got a sword on every different way.
I even have been doing global stuff, right? So the UN is actually doing a plastics treaty negotiation. So we're doing it on all three levels, which again speaks to the severity, to the seriousness of the issue, and one that we very much want to solve. But yeah, no, it's a lot. So the states are in an interesting spot. So one of the challenges in building up all that infrastructure that I talked about is how you're going to get the money for it, right? That's a significant undertaking. And there's a couple ways, right? So the federal government could just pay for it, right? Which we've tried in different ways, and they haven't really done it specifically for recycling, but that is one way to do it. Although we are in an era of these things not necessarily being that easy to get your hands on, but that is one way to do it. Another way is something that is happening in 7 states called extended producer responsibility. And so these are state laws that essentially put a fee on the brand, right? So if you're the brand that is selling the packaging, right? So you're Frito-Lay or something like that, you or Dannon or whoever it is that makes the plastic, that is putting the plastic packaging out there, you would essentially pay a fee on top of, to account for this, to account for the plastic or the glass or whatever material it is that you're using. And that fee would essentially be used to put back into the system to build up the infrastructure to make it more recyclable, and not even to make it more recyclable, to recycle it, to actually get it recycled. And there's 7 states that are doing this right now. There's a few more that are considering it. The challenge there is, and this is where I get to the FTC piece, they don't know how to handle advanced recycling either. And so depending on where you are and depending on what for better or for worse, what political color your state is, whether it's red or blue, is going to help contribute to the outcome of whether or not advanced recycling gets a fair shake or not. And so 2 things are happening in those states. One is the first thing that we were talking about, which is there's certain states where they're just making it real hard in the regulatory pieces of this EPR to build a new facility to do it. Oregon is one of those, right? Oregon's dealing with this right now, and it's a long story, but it's an interesting story. But they're dealing with this right now. And then there's the other side of it, which is, are they going to accept it as recycled content? And we're getting different states doing different things on that as well. I mentioned Oregon. Oregon's a really good example. So Oregon is further along than a lot of states on this EPR scheme. And there's just some types of bottles that you cannot recycle through mechanical recycling. So motor oil, right? The bottle itself is recyclable, but the stuff on the inside isn't going to get washed off adequately. So you can't really do it. So the only way to handle those bottles, which is what Oregon determined, is through advanced recycling. They won't allow any advanced recycling anywhere near the state. And so their solution was to basically ship it to Georgia to be dealt with, which puts a transportation cost on that product that is so high that it basically erodes the margin on the product to begin with. So not a solution. If they would just allow advanced recycling, problem solved, right? But Oregon is not a place where our industry has a significant political foothold. It is a place that obviously is on the progressive side of things, and they're listening to voices who just say no, never, not under any circumstances. And that's how we got here. And there's an element of cutting off your nose to spite your face here, because they don't really have a solution to this problem otherwise. We're offering one and they won't take it.
So are we really talking about this being a manufacturing crisis? A governor, you said it's red or blue, governors who are trying to get into office, they need to campaign saying, look, I'm going to campaign again for this because I think I want to be a manufacturing state. And I think we need to be doing this because 1, it's going to help our environment. 2, it's going to help our manufacturing. 3, it's going to help create jobs. And in the era of AI, where everyone's worried they're going to lose jobs, this is actually going to help the workforce. There's a lot of things happening here. And whether you're talking about the FTC, the EPA, there's a lot of moving parts that you're talking about here.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we are seeing is no matter who they are, no matter what the political stripe of the governor is, they do care about affordability and they care about cost. And so in almost all of those states that have been early actors on extended producer responsibility, they are running into issues where they realize, hey, the cost of this thing, if we don't have some flexibility, if we don't allow not just advanced recycling, but all technologies on the table, bio, all kinds of stuff, then it's going to get a lot more expensive and it's going to hurt our constituents. And Colorado's a place that ran into that. Governor Polis, when he was serving in Congress, I think was the most environmentally leaning member of the Congress, and certainly no stranger to that area. He even said, and he weighed in early and said, look, we need to have our program be as flexible as possible. Gavin Newsom did a similar thing. He had some draft regulations that were pretty constricting, and he said, give them back to me and make them better because they're too expensive as you're doing it. They're running into the realities that if you have a narrow program that basically where the only path forward is to just not have plastic anymore, that may not be a workable solution. And so sooner or later, the facts are going to win out. Man, it would be good if that would happen quickly.
So when you look at this, it really now, as we look at manufacturing and manufacturing works together, what type of technology investments are needed here to make this happen? Because now let's go back to the manufacturers that you said trying to come together, trying to make it happen. So now maybe it needs to be like that because we're seeing a lot of manufacturers having to redo their digital transformation, having to rethink their strategic futures. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, and we've talked about sort of one type of facility, and these are large facilities. They're hundreds of millions of dollars to build, and they need the predictability that they're going to be able to, if they want to build one, that they have a fair shake in getting their permits and they can actually build it up. But it's not just the recycling technologies that we need. We need it across the value chain. Like I said, these facilities need to get used plastics in the door, and that means we need to collect more and we need to sort more. And I think it's unreasonable to think that we're all of a sudden going to change the way that we do curbside recycling, right? We have a way we do it and we do it that way. But there's a lot of new things out there that can help make that a lot more effective. AI in particular can really help out on robots with integrated AI that use special sensors to help sort plastics out. I was at a meeting recently where companies can now actually they can embed the labels with different kind of things that the sortation facility can see and the inference sensors can grab them and AI can sort it out so that there's less human error, there's less error in general, even mechanical error, and you can get more plastic into the system. Things like that, but that takes money and that takes investment. And so whether it's policies designed to get more money into the system or government policy that will incentivize it, these are the things that are needed to help bring some of these to market, just like any emerging industry.
So if you look at this, if the EPA moves forward with this proposal, how quickly could you see meaningful scale up across the country? Because it sounds like this isn't going to happen overnight, but you need to have the EPA behind you.
Yeah, and I don't want to give the impression that EPA acting alone will all of a sudden be the silver bullet that solves the problem. Obviously, there are market issues too, but as market issues kind of go back and forth, we're in a situation where prices are high, right? Because of the conflict in Iran and global supply shortages on raw materials for virgin products. Recycled products all of a sudden have a different market, right? And that's going to kind of yo-yo back and forth over the years. But the more that you can get this stuff up and commercially at scale, the lower the price gets and things get more cost competitive. I will say we are seeing right now, and we've seen it for a couple of years, that a number of facilities either were not built or are just languishing in either getting their operating permit redone or getting a new permit, specifically over the issue that EPA is trying to solve. So one happened in Pennsylvania a few months ago. There's a permit for a facility in Texas right now that is just kind of stuck on this issue. And there's another one in Ohio right now that is suffering from the exact same thing. A company called Agilix walked out of, I think it was Washington or Oregon, and left the United States entirely because they said, look, the regulations just are not clear here. We're going to go to Europe, which is amazing, right? And that is not a place where it is known to be particularly manufacturer friendly. They tend to be a little over-regulated versus everybody else. But the fact that they're an easier place to get the permits is bonkers. And I do think it will have a material impact on it. There are companies, the technology is viable, it's in process now. There are companies building it right this instant. There's a huge facility in Tennessee. There's a huge one doing it in Texas. There are smaller ones in Georgia and Ohio and North Carolina. I do think if the regulatory piece is cleared, it is one key barrier that is removed. And hopefully we'll see some momentum there.
The interesting thing, we all learning, one, AI can do things and help things move a little faster. You talked about the physical AI with robots and things like that. But the other part that we're learning is collaboration. We're learning that the collaboration of companies can make a big difference. Maybe the collaboration of manufacturers, maybe the collaboration of the FTC and the EPA, whatever might happen. But we need that in order for all of these things to happen. And I think that's going to make a big difference here. So looking ahead, I guess maybe this is the bigger question. Do you see advanced recycling as a complement to or a replacement for existing recycling systems and plastic reduction efforts? Because again, if this is going to be delayed, it's got to be sooner rather than later if you're looking about all the things we've been talking about.
Yeah, and our view is it's complementary. Mechanical recycling works. One of our member companies just opened a gigantic new mechanical recycling facility in Indiana, just west of Indianapolis, that is recycling the plastic bags from Walmart and Target, right? Which are hard to recycle, but you can do it mechanically. And getting the systems in place to do it, it requires some unique maneuvering, but you can do it. There are things you can do with mechanical recycling. Like I said, that the rates for plastic bottles and things like that are still pretty high. That works. And frankly, we need to scale that up too if we're going to get to a place where none of the stuff's going to landfills. But there are those plastics that you just can't send to mechanical recyclers. And these are the ones where, and it's a big number, it's 40% of the sort of the plastic packaging that we're looking at here. And so you need it, you can't get there without it, but it is absolutely complementary to mechanical recycling. We benefit in our industry from having companies invested in both. And so we don't view it as a competition at all. It's very much everybody, rising tide lifts all boats.
And that's a very important point. I always say already a bigger pie, everybody gets a bigger piece of the pie. So those rising tide situation, do we have to get Washington to recognize they have to work together? It's too much if things get lost because they argue about the most ridiculous things. I don't want to pick on any one side, but this is part of the challenge. We have to figure out how to solve this for the good of the communities, for the good of the country. Is that some of the challenge you find with some of this right now?
I do. And so before I started doing this, I worked on a number of other environmental issues that were a lot more polarized than recycling. And my goal in this space is to make sure that never happens on recycling, that it is broadly bipartisan. And it is. One of the nice things about this issue is that, and I testified before the House about a year ago, last July, and you had a hearing where essentially all four witnesses, some of whom were Democratic witnesses, some of whom were Republican witnesses, were saying the same thing. And the folks on the other side, the members of Congress, recognized that pretty quickly. They took a bipartisan approach to it. It was one of the more pleasant hearings I've been a part of in a Congress where it took them, 80 something days to reopen an agency, right? They can't agree on much. This is an area that remains bipartisan. A bill that we are very much in favor of was introduced to deal with the FTC side of things and how if you put recycled content into a product, do you get credit for it? A bill came out, it was released in the House in February that had five Republicans, 5 Democrats on it, equal numbers, broadly bipartisan. And I can't remember a time recently where I've seen a bill like that, right? Certainly not in the recycling space. So I'm excited about the fact that this is bipartisan and that it seems to remain bipartisan, despite, like you said, all the fairly charged rhetoric around plastic and things like that. The approach to dealing with it, Congress right now seems to be taking a down the middle approach, and that's how you get things done. So we're hopeful.
And it's exciting to hear you say that because this is something that affects every community, no matter what size the community. And if we look at that's really great to hear. Looking ahead, what's next? What should we be doing to get involved here? What do you want people to do?
So that bill I just mentioned, it's called the Recycled Materials Attribution Act, and it is HR 7502. That's a live ball right now in the Congress. We're hopeful that the Senate will introduce a companion pretty soon, and we're hopeful that this is something that can move this year. What people can do is write, email their member of Congress and say, hey, I want action on recycling. One of the challenges we have with that bill and every other bill is that it's a crowded field in Congress right now. They have no shortage of things to deal with. And so moving this up their list of things that matter is important. And that kind of constituent outreach saying, hey, I want you to be working on recycling. I want you to deal with this problem. That is great. If you mention the bill, even better, HR 7502, the RMAA. But just saying, hey, help us with recycling, help fix this problem would go a heck of a long way towards kind of stopping some of the inertia over this issue in Congress and maybe get them to act. So that would be my call to action on this one is contact your member of Congress right now and say, I need help on these issues.
Ross, if they wanted to, Ross Eisenberg, president of the America's Plastic Makers at the American Chemistry Council, if people wanted to learn more about the things we talked about, where can they go to study up on this kind of thing?
So there's 2 really great websites for this. So one is ours, plasticmakers.org. And that's our brand, America's Plastic Makers. We have all kinds of explanation of recycling and advanced recycling and plastic and how the industry contributes to sustainability and to the economy. We also have a site that zeroes right in on advanced recycling that we put up, .org. Either one of those are great sites. They are light on spin and heavy on facts. And that was the idea there, which is to answer questions about some of this stuff.
Like the light on spin. That's a great one. Thank you, Ross, for joining me today. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
All right, listeners, that is all the time we have today. Make sure to share and subscribe to our episodes each week. Share your thoughts with me on X or at Connected World. Continue to follow us on LinkedIn or YouTube and continue the conversation there. Please check out our website at connectedworld.com or our show website at thepeggysmedleyshow.com. Remember, we broadcast live every Tuesday at 12 p.m. Central, and you could check out our podcast on Thursday. This is the Peggy Smedley Show, your voice for our connected world. And remember, with great technology comes great responsibility.